This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
Anyway, I was working with my editor and, she's like, oh, what do you do? What's your day job? And I told her about prospect research and she said, oh, you've got to write a book about that.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Kate Racculia, writer, editor, designer, instructor, and researcher. Hello, Kate. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Hi, Jen. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, I want to jump right into the book because I loved it. Tuesday Mooney Talks to Ghosts. I love it not just because the protagonist was a prospect researcher, but also because it was fun to read. I'm a murder mystery person on TV and books, and so I'm dying to know what your experience was in prospect research that you chose to wrap a fictional character around it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I also am a very mystery person. Grew up loving Murder, She Wrote. Love an amateur sleuth, right? That is just sort of part of my DNA. And I got into prospect research as a job. I think a way that many people come to prospect research, it's like I just sort of tripped into it. Like people don't go to school to be prospect researchers. My roommate and dear friend at the time, she was a prospect researcher. She was leaving, she's getting married and moving out of state. And she was like, hey, you don't super love your very intense job in finance. I worked in finance. I was a proposal writer before I was a prospect researcher. You don't super love that job. Do you want to throw your resume over to me since I'm leaving this job? And I think you'd really like it. So I did. I applied and interviewed, and I was a prospect researcher. I was a prospect researcher for 4 years at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. I worked with an incredible team of creative, kind, smart, funny people. And I don't think I will ever have another quote unquote day job that is as good as being a prospect researcher was those 4 years. So I think where Tuesday came from, it's my third book. While I was working with my editor on my second book, which is called Bellwether Rhapsody, and in the way that this book is about prospect researchers, that one is about band geeks. Anyway, I was working with my editor, and she's like, "Oh, what do you do? What's your day job?" And I told her about prospect research, and she said, "Oh, you've got to write a book about that." So that was where that idea for Tuesday Mooney as a prospect researcher and an amateur sleuth came from. And you said it was a fun book to read. I had fun writing it. I wrote it after I had left that job, after I had left Boston, and I wanted to capture the sense of fun and excitement and curiosity that is richly rewarded, right? When you research a city or you research donors. That was my experience in the job, and that was the feeling I wanted to get into the book.
Well, you did it. And I love
Yay.
how she was totally volunteering at the event. Yep. We have these big galas all the time. Of course, not during pandemic, although we're looking forward to that again soon.
Yeah.
And her character was so, I've done it. I've been at the galas. You volunteer at the desk to check people in so that you get to meet them. And they really do have eyebrows that look like, super long. It's like, what?
It's true. What?
They're real people.
Yeah, so, it's like doing field work. Yes. You're in your, behind your computer doing all your research and you're getting a picture of a person, but then to actually go out and see donors in the wild. I loved doing that kind of stuff. I love being a fly on the wall and just sort of watching situations and scenes. And that I think comes from, that's my writer side of me, but it's also very much part of the temperament of being a prospect researcher. It's sitting back, just paying attention.
Oh, but there's more. There's more because you didn't just sit back and pay attention, and the protagonist doesn't either. She gets involved. You've got romantic entanglement, murder, mayhem, mystery, scavenger hunt. It's just fabulous.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think that all of the stuff that Tuesday does with her with her sort of cast of characters that she's sort of the Sherlock Holmes of the Indiana Jones, but like neither of those characters is worth much salt without their like cast of characters, this team of people around them. But all the stuff that she does when she's like running around Boston trying to solve these clues, it's all the stuff that I was too chicken to actually do in real life. So in fiction, Tuesday got to do all the things I wanted to do, like poking around in the subway, along the tracks, like just, yeah. I had multiple people. The very first like kind of set piece in the book, and I did write it kind of on an Indiana Jones framework, you know, kind of a 3-act structure. And the first kind of set piece, she and this mysterious, very wealthy man that of course she knows by research, but like in person, he seems very different than what she thought he was. They go down into the Park Street T station to solve this clue. And as I was writing it, I kind of knew another place that this book comes from is like, I missed Boston, right? Like it was time for me to leave. I was moving on to the next stage of my life, but I was like, oh God, I miss it. And I wrote this scene that like makes Park Street look like, even though it's dirty and disgusting and smelly and loud, makes it look kind of beautiful. So yeah, that sort of finding beauty and adventure in the life that's all around you. And I did not know how this book was going to hit in a pandemic, but I've had many readers very generously reach out to me to be like, I can't go anywhere, and your book was delightful because your book goes everywhere. So didn't expect it would hit like that, but very glad that it does.
Well, if we're thinking about some of this wish fulfillment,
Yeah.
it begs the question, what was going on with the character, and why would you put this in there that she breaches the database? Like she goes in and looks for personal health information, PHI, and gets fired. Well, I don't, spoiler alert, gets in trouble for it. What's that about? Like, whoa, made me turn my head. What happened that you thought that you had that thought process?
Well, I mean, I knew, so this is interesting. I worked in finance, like I said, before I worked in fundraising. And I never did anything that I would consider unethical in finance, but like, like no one even talked about ethics when I was in finance. There is a scene in the book where one of the characters, Dex Howard, who's Tuesday's friend, he works in finance. He goes to like a quarterly sales meeting, and just like some of the stuff they're investing in just like makes him feel really complicit and bad, like be part of this system that's exploiting people. So, and like when I was working in finance, no one talked about ethical things. As soon as I went to fundraising, there was like at Nedra, there was always a panel about the ethics of prospect research. So I was like, I don't have any problem with knowing where my boundary is and understanding that this is a job that really thinks about that really takes that seriously. And it's so funny that like people, I think, you know, from my experience, from my point of view, that people look at prospect research as these like creepy snoops, and no one cares about what's happening in finance. Like, anyway, so I was writing about that kind of double standard there. But I also like, you know, it's a story, and your hero has to get in too deep. And the moment when Tuesday she wants to know something so badly that she doesn't think about the ethical implications of it, or where, you know, what line is she prepared to cross? So I needed her to go to like some really dark, bad places. And of course, as a prospect researcher, the worst place you could go is looking up someone's protected health information.
Wow.
So when I have readers who get in touch with me or that I talk to who work in development, the HIPAA violation is the thing that they're always like, oh my God, the HIPAA violation. And like many other readers just like sails right over their heads.
They don't understand the depth of,
they don't.
Of badness.
The breach doesn't, but it's a breach to do that.
I'll tell you, my moment of horror was not so much that she looked, right? But then she just handed over the information to someone she really didn't know well enough to trust with that.
Yep, she sure does. She sure does. Woo! And for someone who like has trust issues, you're like, oh look, she's trusting someone. Nope. Anyway, no, that's her breaking point. That's her rock bottom moment. She has a couple little rock bottom moments at the bottom there, but that is what incites them all.
Yes, yes. Well, so you are now, you mentioned you're not in Boston. You're
Mhm.
at the Bethlehem Area Public Library. What's that
Yes.
all about? How's that going for you?
It's great. It's great. I love it. Right now, so I moved from Boston to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which is sort of eastern central between New York City and Philadelphia, because I was ready to sort of take a leap into a different kind of life. I don't work full time. I work part time at the library, and I do freelance writing. I'm still writing novels, and I teach for Grub Street, which is a writing center based in Boston. It's all online now, but I teach online even in non-pandemic times. And just kind of like have a gig economy life where I sort of put a bunch of things together and have a lot more freedom over my day, which is amazing. And the library, I love working at the library. I do marketing for them. I design flyers and just sort of spread the word about all the great programs and services, but I also do fundraising for them. So I'm kind of my own little one-woman shop who like writes appeals and processes gifts and thank yous and works with volunteers and researches donors. So it's still part-time. It's a very small little job, but I'm still kind of have a toe in the fundraising world. And it's great. I really, really love working for a public library and around librarians who are very much like prospect researchers in terms of their innate curiosity and organizational ability.
I guess I was going to say, well, maybe your next book will be about a librarian, but there's no like money dripping everywhere kind of edge
No.
to being a librarian.
There
So I'm
really
not sure
isn't.
what the dark side would be. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's not like, yeah, it just feels like I go in there and I feel good about like being a champion for democracy. It feels really great. I feel like all of my jobs have sort of like from working in finance to working in fundraising to working in like a public institution have gone, the pay has decreased, but the sort of like moral certitude has increased. So yeah. And I've always been a person who sort of likes to kind of bop around and like add new jobs to my life, partially because I'm a writer too, right? Like all of my books in some ways come out of professional or personal or just sort of organization, like groups that I've been a part of. And jobs are one of those things. But prospect research is a real good one. I really love that.
Well, so is there a sequel in the works, or are you going to start with something fresh?
I am working on something different right now. I'm kind of following the Christopher Nolan pattern where he's like, I'm going to make 3 Batman movies, but in between those 3 Batman movies, I'm going to make a different movie. So like a palate cleanser. So I'm on my palate cleanser now. But yeah, when I imagine this sort of Tuesday Mooney, I like to call it the Mooniverse. I didn't make that up. A friend made that up, the Mooniverse. I did imagine it as being a trilogy. And I think in many ways that made this first book really hard to write because I was trying to like build all of that scaffolding when like, no, Raiders of the Lost Ark is complete in and of itself. You need to write a story that is complete in and of itself. So this is the first of those, but I do have sort of larger plans for 2 other stories that will follow these characters and also deal with some of the unresolved mysteries that are still in this book at the end of it.
Okay, so that's what we can look forward to. Only you're going to make us wait for it.
I know, sorry. I write slow.
I hear you. Before I let you go, I want to ask you that one last question. I know that many prospect researchers love writing, and writing a novel with hundreds of pages of words is really daunting. Like, do you have any advice for the aspiring prospect researcher novelists out there? How do they get from wanting to write something to taking action and getting it done?
Yeah, no, so I'm going to steal this. This is a piece of advice from Anne Lamott, I think, and I forget exactly what she calls it. I think she calls it like the small assignment. And, you look at a novel, right? And it looks daunting because it's like complete and finished and printed. But like no novels begin that way. A novel begins with a single paragraph, right? And so I worked full time when I was writing my first 2 books. And I wrote while I had a full-time job as a prospect researcher, just on the weekends, just kind of sat down for 3 or 4 hours, Saturday and Sunday when I could, and just did what I could, but just didn't stop, right? And those small assignments I'm just going to write this scene. I'm just going to write this next scene. I'm just going to deal with this character's introduction. Those small assignments over time, they just add up. And that's all a novel is. It's not trying to write all of it at once. You just got to focus on one thing at a time, one capacity rating at a time, one profile at a time. I honestly think when I worked in finance, I wrote proposals. So I was used to kind of putting together these large manuscripts from small pieces. And then working as a prospect researcher was almost like running sprints, like writing these capacity ratings, doing the research, completing these ratings one after the other, one at a time, one at a time, one at a time, builds up your muscle for doing these small assignments. And that is all a novel is at the end of the day.
Wonderful advice. I love the
Thank
analogy.
you.
That's great. It's great. I gotta go now. I have an assignment.
You're like, I gotta go. I'm gonna start my book, start my sprint, do my little sprint. You love how I make like a sporting metaphor. I'm not a sporty person.
I would have never guessed that reading the book.
But it just, I mean, writing too. Here's another sport analogy. Like I went to the gym in the time like before we could leave our houses. I built going out and doing sort of physical activity into my life as a routine. And it's the same with writing. You build it into your life as a routine. And at first it's awkward, but then there comes a weird tipping point where you're like, it feels weird to not do it. So that's my advice.
Good. Well, thank you so much for sharing with me today. I'm really excited that I have an author on my podcast.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. I love, as you can tell, I have a great love and respect for prospect research as a field and for my years as a prospect researcher. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
That was Kate Racculia, writer, editor, designer, instructor, and researcher. Yes, prospect researcher. Not only did she write Tuesday Mooney Talks to Ghosts, but she's also written Bellwether Rhapsody and This Must Be the Place. And spoiler alert, they all involve death. Shocking, I know. You can find out more about Kate on her website, www.kateracculia.com. But in March 2021, you also have two scandalously fun opportunities to immerse yourself in all things Tuesday Mooney and research. As part of the Research Pride festivities, you can visit the prospectresearchinstitute.org blog on March 15th for the first clue in a prospect research global scavenger hunt, with the first 5 correct submissions winning a pristine copy of the Tuesday Mooney book. And as if that isn't delightful enough, March 24th, Abra, Florida, and Nedra are going to host Kate Racculia online for a live book reading. With activities like this, you can't help but catch some research pride. Hey, if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come check out the Prospect Research Institute's learning community. It's a membership community with powerful resources, great discussions, and comprehensive courses. Check it out at member.prospectresearchinstitute.org. I'd love to have you join me as a member of the learning community. See you there.